wrapped up our very first trauma responsive care certification series specifically for the first responder population and some others who work very closely with the first responder population. And we were able to do this because of a federal grant that a partnering agency of ours, Mental Health America of Northern Kentucky and Southwest Ohio, received. And we are one of their training partners on this grant that was really written to help first responders to become better trained in trauma and trauma-informed care. We partnered also with Mary Vicario and her team at Finding Hope Consulting, which the gift that all of them have is being able to take this somewhat complex neuroscience, take it and they translate it into things that are easy to understand and easy interventions. And sometimes it's just a matter of the language you use to ask a question that makes all the difference.
She explained what was going to happen and then invited him to see if he was interested in doing that. The invitation is so important. It's that area of choice, because when something comes back as a reaction, that's not choice. It's just doing its thing to you. So,
next level.
Impactful.
Being more aware.
Eye-opening.
I'm better equipped to work with families, to work with kids, to work with staff who are experiencing trauma. And I think that's just so critical in the work that we do.
Understanding the background of why we're acting the way we're acting, and I know it's going to help me, whether it's out helping the citizens or helping my own peers. Just understanding the whys. I could see myself handling situations differently having this knowledge. This training doesn't exist right now for the typical, first responders. I realize it's more complex, and there's a story, but there's the story behind the story.
Probably the biggest takeaway for me is the brain science, and just understanding that there's a reason why we behave the way that we do, we feel the way that we do, and we act the way that we do. And being able to take that back to the firehouse and understand the relationships that we have there, and using it that way, making people feel safe so that we can share how we are feeling, and so they don't have to feel that way anymore. But then to take it another step and go to like the scene of an incident and make all of our patients and communities feel that they can be safe and share whatever they're feeling as well. I feel like I just have more knowledge and I'm better able to help.
I feel like that this training has prepared me to understand that it's really not the anger that is sometimes portrayed. It's more of a fear and a worry, and then it allows me an opportunity to step back and then to provide some type of, I call it informal grace to the people that I work with, so that I can hear and understand and figure out how to make them feel safer. So definitely, I feel very grateful for the training, and I just feel better prepared to go out and help the people that I serve.
Some of the biggest takeaways for me is understanding the motivators behind why people do the things that they do. When you're talking about addiction and domestic abuse, I know a lot of officers get frustrated dealing with those problems because you feel like you arrest the same people over and over and over again and it just doesn't go anywhere. I think having a better understanding of why it's not going anywhere, and that even if it doesn't go anywhere, that doesn't mean that the job you're doing isn't important, and that doesn't mean that you didn't have an impact. Maybe it's not the impact you wanted that time, and eventually something's going to give with that person. And so I think that understanding why it is that you might not always get through to that domestic violence survivor, you might not always get through to that drug addict that time, why it's important to keep trying, and why it is that it didn't work that one time. I personally feel like this genre of education for law enforcement is probably one of the most important things. That we train so much in defensive tactics and all that is obviously very important for those critical moments when it becomes necessary. But I think that as far as a percentage of our daily functions, we would get so much more usage out of this type of training on understanding behaviors, on how to connect with people. That's one of the things that I took away from this training specifically, was that connection that people are seeking, and how to implement that in my day-to-day work was really important. So I think this is a good supplement to the crisis intervention training.
I think there's so much from this series. It was just understanding how we work with someone who's really dealing with trauma, understanding we aren't making excuses for them, we're trying to understand their behavior and trying to get them safe, but it helps us to work with them and work towards reunification when we understand why they're exhibiting the behaviors that we're seeing. It also helps us to provide for these kids, because the kids are really exhibiting some behaviors as well because of the trauma that they've experienced. And I can say we've been doing this for a few months now, and I use what I've learned here probably every day in my office, even just knowing not to ask that yes or no question for someone that really is in the midst of that trauma and they're not in a place where they're able to talk about that. I've used it a lot. Unfortunately, we had a bad case last week, and just helping my staff through that. I used it there, so I'm using it every day now.
That whole perspective shift on, well, there's a reason why this happens over and over to some folks, and there's a reason why it's multi-generational, but now instead of hiding it away from folks, I have permission to talk about it, get help for it, and really use my peers in the field as resources in their understanding a change in their work. And often people will tell us it's changed their life.